I was born in Swaziland, which is in the southern part of Africa, and then I grew up in South Africa for the first 10 years of my life, and then we moved back to Rwanda, which is actually where my parents are from. So I'm Rwandan, or Rwandese, and so that's where I lived most of my life. I lived in Rwanda for 19 years, about 19 years. And yeah, I grew up with my mom, my dad, a brother, and a sister. So yeah, that's pretty much my early childhood.
What was it like growing? I know from a personal perspective, growing up in Texas, I can say how it was like growing up in Texas in my small part of Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Though I can't give the whole, aspect of it. What was it like growing up in the particular part of Rwanda that you grew up?
Right. So I grew up in Kigali, and that's the capital city of Rwanda. A very, growing and developing city. I think that growing up in Rwanda is one of those things where like I didn't have really anything else to compare it to. So, it was just a normal childhood. I went to school, played with other friends and played with friends and had cousins, went to my grandma's. It was a pretty normal life growing up, especially since it was during a time when it was years after the genocide. And so I can't say that I experienced living in a place where, we were still worried about, are we going to be alive tomorrow or stuff like that. So it was a pretty normal childhood. Mm-hmm.
That's great. Mm-hmm. Okay, can you elaborate, or rather start to tell me about your upbringing, your education before you went to college, who has influenced you, your role models, and who today, now that you have come to Texas,
Mm-hmm.
has become a great mentor to you?
So because the first part of my life was in South Africa, I was speaking English, right? So English is one of the primary languages in South Africa, and so English was the first language that I actually learned. And then when I moved to Rwanda, obviously you speak Kinyarwanda, which is our native language. You speak French. Some of the families speak Swahili, including my family, since they lived in countries where they had to learn Swahili. But the primary school that I went to, which I believe is elementary school in America, was a French school, right? So it's a French system, but then they have English sections. So these are sections where you can go in if you're an English speaker, and then take classes in English and all of that. So I was in the English section. But that's when I also got to learn French, and then I learned Kinyarwanda, and then I learned a little bit of Swahili and all the other languages that I speak now. So it was very interesting because when I was young, I did recognize the change in moving from South Africa to Rwanda, because when I was in South Africa, I thought South Africa was home, but then to realize that no, South Africa is actually not home, and for my parents, Rwanda was their home. And so going to Rwanda and then realizing, oh, okay, this is what it is, but there's language barrier because most of my family members only spoke Kinyarwanda, so it was one of those things where I had to learn Kinyarwanda, which wasn't too slow for me because I was younger, so it facilitated the rate at which I learned other languages. But I remember being in school and just being intimidated by the fact that I couldn't understand what my peers were saying or talking about. Even when they spoke English, it was always like English with a mixture of Kinyarwanda, and so it would be one of those things where I would find myself a bit isolated, but that was just for like the first year, right? By the second year, I was already used to the place, used to the language, which I think is the advantage of moving to a place when you're young. So I only went to 2 schools. So throughout my primary school I did elementary school and middle school, which was, for us, it's primary 1 to primary 6. And that was at a school called La Colombière, which is the French school that I was telling you about. And then when I went to high school, I went to a school called Green Hills Academy, and that was an English-speaking school. So it was pretty interesting because I remember just trying to hold on to the fact that I was from South Africa or that I had lived in South Africa and always kind of using it as, a way to brag because South Africa is a pretty cool country. It's like the America of Africa. So it's like, yeah, it's a pretty big deal. But so it was one of those things where I remember just holding on to it because I hadn't understood, that I was home and my actual home. So it was very interesting, growing up through that and just seeing how, my parents tried to instill in me the idea that no, this is actually your home. Like, stop trying to hold on to what's not yours. But they understood that better because they had been out of Rwanda for several years because of, what was going on in the country. So to them, it was finally a moment to go back home. And so now they're teaching their daughter and their son to be like, this is what we were fighting for all this time, And so obviously my parents are definitely my role models, because sometimes we think that a role model is someone who was either at war or like, at the forefront of movements and was the one who, did all the bloody work or the dirty work. But sometimes it's just the person who wakes you up in the morning, gives you a hug after a long day, and a kiss on the forehead and, makes you feel special. So definitely my parents have continued to be the role models in my life. Yeah.
Is there anyone that has come into your life recently since you've been at Wiley College that has become a mentor to you?
Mm-hmm. So recently I've been reading a lot of African American literature, right? Which is something, unfortunately, that we're deprived from back home. If anything, it's this white guy wrote this book, this white woman wrote this book. We barely even have our own literature as Africans, which is very disappointing and sad. But I went out there and I found books, right? And, I've been reading a lot of Toni Morrison. I've been reading a lot of James Baldwin. And they've become... I don't know, I keep on saying whenever I talk about Maya Angelou and talk about Alice Walker, I always talk about them like they're like my grandma, my aunts, like I've given them roles in my life, and even though I don't get to meet them directly, but I think literature, reading their stuff and listening to them definitely has a way of creating this connectedness, right? So after reading The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, I just... it was one of those things where no matter where you're from, there's always things that connect you as humans, right? But then as Black people, and when I talk about Black people, I'm talking about Africans, I'm talking about African Americans, Caribbeans, we always have particular experiences that we share in one way or another. And so when I was reading Pecola and I'm reading about Frida and I'm reading about all of these women, these girls that are in her books, I'm like, well, Toni knows me more than anyone else, And so I think they've definitely become people that are important in my life that I've been reading and looking up to ever since I've been to Wiley College. Yeah.
You've been a teacher, maybe?
I don't want to lie and say like there is. So, I mean, I'm in a good space, and they've been encouraging. But I don't want to, I don't want to lie and I don't, but yeah. I guess more of my peers instead, my colleagues, when I came on the debate team and, I made friendships with people that, African Americans that took me in and tried to, make me avoid the feeling of feeling that I'm not part of them because I'm from another place, which was very interesting because when I went to an HBCU, when I realized that Wiley was an HBCU, there was this sense of, okay, I'm not going to have to deal with racism and all of these white people. But then I had to deal with otherism, right? And prejudice, and you're Black, but you're not really Black. Oh, you're African. Well, Africans think that they're better than us, and you don't like us, and we don't like you. And And it was basically trying to answer questions for the whole continent, and being accused, your people sold us. We wouldn't have been here if it wasn't for that. And, to some extent, I understand the rage and the anger and the accusations, right? But when you're coming from a place where you were not even taught about slavery, because at home, we were not taught about slavery, right? If anything, I always say that back home we're in denial of colonization because we never tap into that part of history, right? So coming here where people, slavery isn't forgotten and won't easily be forgotten because we're constantly reminded that we're Black in this country, right? But it's like coming into a space where people look like you, and you automatically feel at home because back home Black is the default color. But then you realize that it's not just about the way you look, right? It's the culture and where you're from and how you speak and how you dress, what music you listen to, and all of these things that become a source of division, right? But I've definitely had, especially women on campus, women, professors, certain professors that I've had conversations with, and it doesn't necessarily have to be every day, but significant conversations that I've had that have definitely changed my perspective in one way or another. Mm-hmm.
How would others describe your peers, family, friends?
I think that depends, and it has changed over the years, obviously. I think that definitely growing up, I would have been described as an extrovert, loud and just crazy and just active. But I think after coming to college, I was introduced to myself, reintroduced to myself. And that's because I was away from the space that I've always been in, and people always being around you and active and all of that kind of stuff, and then coming into a new place where no one knows you, no one cares if you're awake or not, and so you're trying to figure it out on your own. And I think that because of that, the introvert in me was born. And so it kind of became something like becoming like, I would say I'm an ambivert at this point. So I think depending on who knows me at what time in my life, they would get to decide what they would see me as. So there's no like one answer to that question.
Can you give me an example of a time, whether it had been here in Texas or in another state you had visited, or possibly even in a space where there were white people in Rwanda, or of European descent, rather, that you have experienced racism and how it impacted you and how it either changed you or helped you to realize who you are, what your value is?
Yeah, so as I said, in Rwanda, Black is the default color, right? And even the white people that are there are automatically the minority. So if anything, they're trying to adapt to our space, right? But what that does is that you don't understand what being a minority means until you come into a space where you have to be a minority. And so when I came to Texas, I was still part of the majority because I'm in an HBCU, so I'm Black. Until I started competing, right, and traveling and going to different tournaments. And I remember there's a time I was in a round, and we were competing, and it was an NPDA round, and I was with my partner, and we were competing against two white students. And as the round was going, it was clear that we had won the round, like with no doubt, right? And not that I was an expert at it, but it was one of those things where if you listen and follow the arguments, we had definitely won, right? That was my very first tournament, I remember. And then we go out of the room and everything, and then we're told that we didn't win that round, right? And so we read the ballot, because I was definitely confused. I was like, I don't understand why I did not win the round, or we didn't win the round. And so I read, and I'm trying to figure out what the judge is saying, and it didn't make sense. He said something along the lines like, I think the other team convinced me more, or something like that. So I'm trying to get my partner to explain to me where we went wrong. And so my partner looks at me and he's like, Winnie, we're Black. And I was like, okay, yeah, I get that. But let's go back to the points. Like, why? He's like, Winnie, we're Black. He's like, this is going to happen several times. And he's an African American, right? And he has lived, that has been his life. And so he's explaining to me, you're going to face this several times. You're going to be in rounds where you believe that you've won, but you're going to lose those rounds because you're Black. You're going to be in rounds where the judge will choose to just shut you off because you're Black, right? He's like, you are going to face certain things because you're Black. And when he said that, it just kind of opened my eyes. And I was like, whoa, okay, so so this is what it is, right? But what's interesting about being an African and like Black in America is that you have an accent, right? And so there's a very interesting way when you're in a room and a white person comes in, or you're in a room with white people, before you speak, they'll be like, oh, she's Black, right? But then when you speak and they hear the accent, they're quick to be like, well, she's Black, but she's a different kind of Black. So then it will be like, where are you from? What are you doing here? And then there's this like, just this sudden interest that just is suddenly born because of the accent, which just makes it a whole different experience.
You as a person who is African directly, first generation American, you would be called, I think. Having realized what you just said, how does that allow you to empathize with the plight of African Americans who have lived that their entire lives?
I think that for me personally, it didn't take me long to understand, and I'll never fully be able to completely understand or feel what African Americans feel, right? But it has never been hard for me to understand or empathize with their experiences, right? I think that the first judgment that I get, as I said, like being totally dismissed in a room or barely acknowledged because I'm Black, that in itself is enough, right? Because you're just like, the fact that no one is looking at me or no one is even wanting to engage me in a conversation because of my skin color, that in itself, it doesn't need to take you to have lived through it for 400 years or 300 years, because at that particular moment as a human, you want attention and you want to be acknowledged, right? So it definitely never took me a long time to understand. But then, in some funny way, there are moments where I will have a privilege that they don't have, right? And a privilege because of an accent or because I look kind of different, and so people want to know where I'm from. And that's a privilege because I'm being acknowledged in the moment. And so understanding that means that I have a role to play in being like, no. I'm still going to stand in solidarity with people that look exactly like me, that are being oppressed by you, right? And so you trying to take me out of that group because of my accent or because of where I'm from doesn't make it any better.
Okay, I want to go back. I should have asked you this question. Or maybe I did. Do you have any siblings?
I do.
Can you describe them to me, what your relationship is with them, and how they've influenced you and helped to influence you as you are today?
I do have an older brother. He's 3 years older than me. And I have a young sister who's 7 years younger than me. My brother and I have gotten closer. As we grew, we got closer and closer. When we were young, we definitely fought a lot. But now, because he's here as well, he's in America as well, and he has definitely been my rock. He's definitely been my support system. I cannot imagine what it would have been like having to come here when he's not here and having to go through what I've gone through alone. I think him having a couple of years of experience of being here before I came here definitely made it easier for me because he knew how to guide me through it. And through that guiding and all of that, it brought us closer. And then my young sister is my heart. She's definitely my baby because I'm 7 years older than her. So I've literally seen her like grow, and I'm seeing her grow. And so she's definitely my baby. And I think with her, I've always learned how to have, I feel like she's my daughter. So she has, I have this mother-daughter relationship with her. Which is just, I think, has been the direct source of my compassion, or just being compassionate towards people and younger people especially. So yeah, they definitely play a very big role in my life. Mm-hmm.
If I may ask, what is your faith background? Does your religion, your spirituality, does it play into what you feel is your purpose in life? Has it helped you? Or has it shown you, has it shown you the path that you should take?
I grew up in a Christian family, like I believe most Africans would say this. I definitely grew up in a Christian family. It was a pretty strict Christian family, which, now I appreciate. But I also definitely, at some point had a lot of issues with the church, with my church or the church I grew up in, interpretation of Bible verses and all of these kind of things. A lot of things that I didn't agree with. And, not to question the Bible, not to question the church, not to question your adults. So it almost became, I almost became rebellious towards whatever the church put out there, but it wasn't out of anger towards God. It was always towards them, towards the people, because I've never doubted that God is good, or that God wants to see us have a relationship with Him. But I think that it's always what we take, and as humans, we just take everything that's pure and pervert it, or like tainted. But definitely, my faith in God shapes my everyday life. It's what definitely plays a very big role in how I think and how I make decisions and how I carry myself. I believe that my relationship with God has definitely kept me sane. So yeah, definitely, it's definitely played a big role in my life and continues to play a big role in my life. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're going to wrap up the interview.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask you, is there anything else that you want to say? Another story that you believe you are compelled to talk about and that you would like to share with us?
No. I'm glad I'm here. I think that I'm continuing to learn every day what it means to live in a space like this in America, in a time like this, in the political state, in the political era that we're in. So I think that it's a process that I'm continuing to be part of, and learning what it means to not just be human, but to be Black and to be a woman in a world that continues to throw things against you. But I'm definitely privileged to be alive today. So thank you.